All right, very good afternoon for each and every one across the world. This is a very interesting concept that we're all evolving into, a virtual conference which has been happening for the last 12, 18 months. So it's been my pleasure, along with my panelists, my colleagues, and Christina and Jane. So thank you again for organizing this. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Uh, the panel today for this afternoon is very interestingly a span across geographies which are very harmonized in some sense and not so harmonized in some sense. So we're talking Southeast Asia and we're talking Africa. So the spotlight on Africa and Southeast Asia is a very interesting harmony, if I may say that. So to that extent, we've got a very interesting mix of panel as well. I've got some esteemed colleagues for three or four different nature. I'll start with Mr. Anshu Srivastav. So Anshu has a very interesting corporate background. He comes with about 19 years of professional work experience with the senior management roles based currently in Singapore. He works for Sandoz and he heads up business development and portfolio for Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia in the capacity of head of business development. So prior to Sandoz, Anshu has been working with some very interesting large branded generic pharmaceuticals companies, including Lupin and Cipla. And he has spanned across various roles between business development, P&L, profit center roles across Latin America, Asia Pacific during his career. So with that, I would now request Anshu to maybe speak a few words, and he's got 20 minutes to make his presentation about potentially the growth prospects in Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, which is again, from an Asian economy standpoint, is a very interesting space to be in the pharmaceuticals arena now. So over to you, Anshu. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kamal, for that lovely introduction which you have given me. And hello, everyone right across the globe. It is a pleasure to connect with you here today. And I'm really happy to be here given the circumstances which we find ourselves in. I would have loved to be doing this in person, but I think this is the next best thing. And so thank you for all of your time. As my friend Kamal mentioned, my name is Anshu Srivastav. I am the BDNL head for Sandoz for the Southeast Asia and North Asia region. And today I will be in this geo-focus segment talking a little bit about the Southeast Asia markets and my experiences in it. So the particular first slide over here is just sort of giving you a comparison of Southeast Asia markets, against the major market clusters available in the globe. Now, the interesting thing over here is that in this IQVIA slide, Southeast Asia is largely defined as the ASEAN bloc. But in reality, most companies which are operating in this region actually define this market very differently. And based on how and which countries they include in this, the size of this market could actually vary from about $20 billion to upwards of $40 billion. So no matter how you choose the market, the key thing to note for Southeast Asia region is that, it is one of the fastest growing market clusters across the world. And it is, almost 2 times the growth rate of some of the more, advanced and developed markets. So Southeast Asia from that perspective is a very important market. And another important thing to note over here that Southeast Asia is catering to one of the large population bases, right? So moving along, I would just like to say that, Asia markets in general are a set of dynamic and fast-growing markets, as I mentioned. And a lot of the countries have some similarities or commonalities running between them, particularly with regards to the regulatory requirement or with regards to the GMP requirement, the timelines, etc. But by and large, if you see, these markets are very different from each other. And so they require, a very customized approach when you are making strategies for these markets. And why these markets are different is because, these markets are basically very different when it comes to their market maturity. So based on the market maturity, you could actually break up the market segments into 3 clusters. The first one being, nascent markets, which are markets like Myanmar or Vietnam, Bangladesh, where generally the GDP per capita and the healthcare spend per capita is much lower. The healthcare infrastructure is poor and still developing. These markets are very highly price sensitive, and they are reliant for importation for their drug use. The next set of markets which you could classify are the emerging markets in Southeast Asia. These markets are typically Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. Now here the GDP per capita and the healthcare spend per capita is much better. One more key aspect of these markets is that the healthcare infrastructure in these markets is rapidly developing. Although these markets still lack structured sort of healthcare reimbursement and coverage of the population. And as far as the manufacturing capabilities in these countries are concerned, they have a good knowledge about the local basic generic drug development and drug production. The third set of markets could be called the developed markets in Asia region. These are typically markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan. In these markets, the infrastructure for healthcare is extremely well developed. The per capita GDP and the healthcare spend is also extremely high. And from a manufacturing perspective, these markets have sophisticated manufacturing capabilities, including biologicals. Right. So moving along now, I will take you through some of the key markets, which are present in Southeast Asia. And here I would like to mention that due to limitation of time, I'm covering only about 4 or 5 key markets in the Asia region. However, a longer version of my presentation will be made available to you on the platform by the organizers, in which you can actually take a look at a lot more market information, which I have included. Right. So the first market which we will be taking up is Thailand. Now, this particular slide is, giving some of the demographics of Thailand, which is for everyone to see. However, the key thing to note over here in Thailand is that, it's a very important market in Southeast Asia, largely because it is a $6 billion plus market, and it is growing at a good growth rate of about 6 to 7% year on year. It has almost 200, companies within Thailand, and, the market penetration for generics is at about 40%. So this is quite an attractive market, but a difficult market for a lot of companies to enter, and I will come to that part. So talking about market access of Thailand, so in Thailand, what happens is that the general public is actually reimbursed by the various healthcare schemes of the government, and of course, private insurance or out of pocket is also available. Those who want to skip the long queues and also opt for better healthcare services. So, you have the option, but there is some sort of coverage which, covers the population by and large. Talking about the regulatory requirements of Thailand, well, the regulatory requirements of Thailand run across, the other requirements in Asia, which is your typically the Zone 4B stability data, the COPP, the fixed GMP approval. But one of the key factors in Thailand, is also that it requires local bioequivalence studies, for oral solid products. So this is one of those rare markets in Southeast Asia which asks for a local BE. So you should make note of that. As far as the channels in this market are concerned, it's a market which is a good mix of both sort of tender and retail. And even the tenders are actually, announced by multiple tender bodies. So there's not just like a single national tender, but you have multiple tenders which you can participate in. And tenders is an important segment, in the market. Talking about patents, of course, patents are very much applicable, and you have the standard 20-year term, with no extensions which are possible. From a distribution perspective, I would say that, for your interest, most of the foreign companies which operate in Thailand, they enter into partnerships with, the local distributors for a 3PL or a warehousing and distribution model. Whereas the large local companies, they will have their own distribution setup which they operate in. And of course, Thailand being a lucrative market, most of the multinational companies have a strong presence in Thailand. They have their own commercial teams. And so some of the new entrants which have entered the market have generally done so through partnerships, And if I had to sort of list out, a key takeaway for Thailand, it would be that, the generic market is actually expanding, and there is going to be an increased price pressure, particularly with the tenders. However, if you're a new entrant, it is very essential for you to get your products, listed in the national list of essential medicines so that you can cater to the entire market. So this is a key takeaway for the market. Now, moving on, the next market is again also a very interesting market. A lot of companies are actually eyeing Philippines. Philippines, well, it is again a $3 billion market, and it is having a moderate growth rate of about 3 to 4%, as you can see in the graph. A large number of companies are already present in Philippines. It's more than 450 companies, and the market is right now dominated by the generics over the originators. And this has largely got to do with the fact that Unilab, which is a single player, is having almost more than 25% of the market share. From a market access perspective, just to let you know, Philippines is a largely out-of-pocket market, and as of now, it was a free pricing sort of. The prices were not regulated in Philippines. However, that has changed in the recent past. The government has included a list of about 122 originator products which are coming under drug price control. And I'm told that there are more to be included in phases. So this is definitely going to create a pricing pressure. From a regulatory perspective, again, here the requirements are pretty standard with regards to the ACTD dossier and the stability COPP. But the key thing, which you guys should note for Philippines is that there is a viable tool called baby CPR, which is available for making an entry into the market. And for those who may not be familiar with what the baby CPR is, if I have to explain you, it's more like a clone of an existing MA, and this gives you a faster access to the markets. So you can enter the markets maybe 6 months to a year, by opting for a baby CPR of a local partner, while you actually sort of build up your own MA pipeline, which takes about 3 to 4 years. So this is a viable option which a lot of companies use as an entry point. Talking about the channels in Philippines, well, it is again predominantly dominated by the pharmacy segment, and one of the large pharmacy chains in Philippines is a chain called Mercury Drug, and Mercury Drug is having absolute sort of 50-55% of the total market share. So it absolutely dominates. Hence, it becomes a very crucial partner for those companies who want to enter the branded generic space in Philippines. As far as the patents are concerned, yes, patents are applicable in Philippines, and it is the standard 20-year term with no extensions which are possible. Most of the foreign companies which are operating in Philippines are actually working through local distribution partners, and they employ third-party distributors. I must sort of say over here that the distribution margins in Philippines are slightly higher as compared to some of the other markets, and this has got largely to do with the nature of the market, which is like a collection of islands. And the important takeaway here, I would say, in Philippines is that earlier Philippines had a much faster regulatory timeline, but over the years the regulatory timeline has now extended to almost 3-4 years, including the pre-assessment window which they have. So this could get a little frustrating for for the new entrants. And also, there are going to be increased pricing pressures. The prices were quite reasonably good in Philippines, but however, due to the drug price control which has been recently introduced, I think there will be constant pricing pressures, which will take the prices down. So now let's move on to a very important market in the Southeast segment, which is Vietnam. And I know a lot of my European friends are actually present in Vietnam through various partnerships. Vietnam is actually a $4.5 billion market, and it is growing at a 7% plus growth rate, which is quite impressive. It is again, it is a market which is largely supportive of generics, with 70% of the market being dominated by the generic products. As far as the pricing in Vietnam is concerned, Vietnam again follows a free pricing, but there is a ceiling price which each company needs to sort of register with the local regulatory authorities. And the population in Vietnam have the choice of taking a coverage under the national health insurance schemes, or they could opt for a private insurance scheme. Of course, so needless to say that the private insurance schemes are more out of pocket. And coming to the market, well, the market is a very good mix of both tender and retail. However, the tender component far outweighs the retail and becomes a very important component when you're operating in Vietnam. And again, the tender are at multiple levels. They are at national level. They are at different hospital level. And the interesting takeaway over here for you to note is that the tenders are categorized in various groups, or they are broken down in various groups and categories. For a generic player, there are about 5 categories, in which every product tender is broken down into. And depending on which category you fall under and where you are manufacturing the product, you can actually participate in those categories, and there will be sort of one winner under each category in a tender. So basically, if the tender volumes are say 100,000, it would be 20,000 under each of the 5 categories, and there would be a single winner in each of those categories. So a single product can be sort of tender can be shared by multiple players depending on which category you fall. So this becomes a very important strategies for companies who are eyeing Vietnam as to where which category they fit into, because the price levels for each of these is very different. So European manufactured products are of course having top billing and they get the top prices. So you need to sort of be very well aware as to which tender groups you fall into. Talking about the regulatory requirements, they are pretty standard, but one thing to note over here is that in Vietnam, you have sort of one plant, one registration. And so it's very important as to whom you partner with. As far as the distribution and tendering is concerned, so in Vietnam, no foreign company can actually sell the product to health facilities. You require a local company which is owned by a local Vietnamese, to participate, which sort of adds to the complexity of the supply chain. It just adds one tier to it. So you need to make note of that. And one of the key sort of takeaway again in Vietnam would be that it is again a very price sensitive market. The generics are definitely growing. Tenders are very important. Biosimilars are going to be playing a big role. However, let me tell you that the price erosion in tender year on year is pretty steep. It could be almost 5-10% each year. So there is a constant pressure on pricing. The next market, which we will look at is Malaysia. So Malaysia is rather smallish, $2 billion market, but it is still growing at a good growth rate of about 6-7%. A lot of pharmaceutical companies already exist in Malaysia, and although the information is not very easily available, but market estimate is that 65-70% of the market is dominated by the originator brands, where 30-35% is with the generics. And in Malaysia, the healthcare is again divided into sort of 2 segments. One is the public healthcare, which is fully subsidized by the government, for the citizens of Malaysia. And the next is the private healthcare, which you can opt for in case you want, faster access to healthcare, or you want better, facilities. Regulatory requirements, again, they follow the standard regulatory requirements of Southeast Asia. Channel-wise, again, Malaysia, like other markets, is a mix of retail and tender, with retail component being around 60% and the tender component being 40%. But the key thing to note over here is that a tender participation in Malaysia can happen only via someone known as a Bhumi agent. Now, basically, a Bhumi agent is nothing but a local Malay-owned company which can participate in the tender on your behalf. So this is something which is similar to what we just saw in Vietnam, which is just adding to a level of complexity in the supply chain. And another thing to note is that Malaysia has a significant doctor dispensing market. As far as the distribution setup is concerned, most of the foreign companies over here are working with local distributors, and Zuellig Pharma and DKSH are absolutely dominating the market, with regards to the distribution. And the multinational companies mostly are operating in Malaysia through their own entity and their own marketing setups. And if you're looking to enter Malaysia, right now the government is in the last few years also encouraging multinationals to set up their own offices and set up manufacturing sites in Malaysia by offering, several tax benefits. One of the key takeaways for Malaysia, I would say, is that Malaysia had a free drug sort of policy right now, free pricing. However, that is bound to change, because the government is mulling bringing some sort of price control, and they are looking at reference price from some of the countries, which is definitely going to have its pressures. So if I have to, move on to the next market, it's Singapore. It's, pretty similar. It's a very small market at about $1 billion. And again, it is predominantly dominated by multinationals, and the originators are having about 90% of the market, which gives a plenty scope to the generic brands. And of course, the population is largely covered, entire population is covered by the various government subsidy schemes. Regulatory, again, I would say that it is pretty standard requirements which they have. Singapore market is largely tender driven again, and it's a well-established, well-respected patent scenario with 20 years of patent. The tenders over here are, of course, awarded for 1 to 3 years. So that is also a very key. The market is dominated by tenders. Most of the multinational companies are operating through local distributors, and they are present with their own offices and with their own setups. The key takeaway is that there's plenty of push towards generic, which is happening in Singapore, and so the generic share is bound to sort of go up in the coming years. And also that there is a definite push towards the digital space in Singapore with the IT master plan of the government, which is going to have a positive impact on the healthcare within the country. Now, talking about some of the key takeaways, I've already touched upon these, but if I had to mention a couple of these, I would say that Southeast Asia needs a sort of tailored approach as per the markets where you're operating in, and it's not one solution which fits all. So you have to be careful of that, and also you need to be flexible in terms of your supply chain and things, because the volumes could be pretty low, and you need to take note of that also. Regulatory wise, also a lot of companies face challenges because of the Zone 4B and the marketed COPP, which delays the first to entry sort of models. And establishing partnerships in this region is the key. I can't emphasize more on this. Now, in the last couple of minutes, I'd quickly like to touch upon Sandoz in the Asia region. So as you know, Sandoz is a division of Novartis, and we have Novartis is one of the largest companies in the world. We have a very broad therapeutic segment which we cater to, and we are absolute global leaders when it comes to biosimilars, generic oncology, and antibiotics. In Southeast Asia, we are, of course, the largest multinational generic company across the sector, and we have footprints all over Asia markets. And over the years, we've had a very strong growth in this region, and we continue to sort of show solid double-digit growths, which will outpace the market easily. From an employee perspective, we are almost 800 people plus across Asia, with more than 82% being in the field force or out there in the field. So therapeutic class wise, also I would say that we cater to a very broad spectrum. We are present in dominating in cardio and anti-infectives, but we have strong presence in oncology, CNS, and respiratory. And of course, we have one of the largest biosimilar portfolios. So all in all, I would like to conclude by saying that Sandoz is having a very strong presence in the region. We have the desired experience. So probably we are your partner of choice for the region. So if you're looking for a partnership, we are happy to have a discussion with you. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. And over to you, Kamal.
All right. Anshu, thank you very much for the very compelling presentation, I suppose, on opportunities across Asia. From listening to your presentation, I think I get two sort of gamut of knowledge and gamut of insights. So one is clearly on across those 7-8 markets that you represented. I think clearly a very strategic opportunity landscape was laid out, looking into the future of these economies, which are very core as we all see. And alongside what was very interesting to me, was very captivating, rather, was the operating framework that you laid out. I think it cut across pricing, the regulatory framework, the channel, the competitive landscape, the patent scenario and distribution, and many such nuances of how does one enter into Asia, or if they're already present in Asia, what are the sort of nuances that one would have to navigate through to take the best opportunity in the economy there, in the countries there. So I think that was a very, very balancing, a very compelling presentation, and I'm more than confident that the audience cherished it. We will definitely come back to you if you could kindly stay with us on the panel. If we will definitely come back to you with some relevant questions if there are any from the audience or from the panelists. So once again, thank you very much, Anshi. It was a very, very intriguing presentation. Much appreciate that. All right. So, folks, moving from Singapore, where Anshu is based, which is almost 9:30, I'm told, there in Singapore, from Singapore and Asia to Africa. Now, this is a very interesting jump. I'm not even sure if there is a direct flight, but assume the virtual world, you don't need one. So I'm going to quickly move into the Africa part of the panel. And I've got the privilege to introduce two of my very esteemed colleagues here who come with a very different background altogether. So let me start with myself, if that's allowed, and maybe introduce myself as to who I am, and then I will move into the other panelists. So my name is Kamal Kandare, and I head up what is called as business development for Cipla in Africa. I've been in the industry for over about 14 years now, and I've spanned across very similar roles into P&L, profit center roles, business development, and largely into mergers and acquisitions. So that's been my sort of forte over the last 14 years. Worked across multiple companies, Dr. Reddy's, Cipla, and before that with some injectables manufacturing organizations, worked across multiple emerging markets and also regulated markets like the US and Europe. So that's been my sort of span of experience. I'm very excited to be here. By way of training, I'm an engineer by training, and I hold a master's degree in business administration. So that's who I am. Now I'd like to welcome my panel, Ayman and Alak, if you don't mind putting on your videos, which I can't see for now. So I've got Mr. Ayman Sheikh Lahu. Very good afternoon, Ayman, and thank you again for taking the time. It is very interesting to finally meet with you. So Ayman is a chief executive officer for one of the very rich pharmaceutical companies, rich in the sense of value systems, called Cooper Pharma. I've learned very recently about Cooper and was very intrigued by the way Cooper Pharma has organized itself. So Ayman is the chief executive officer of Cooper Pharma Laboratories and also the vice president of what he calls a FMIIP. I was struggling a little bit to expand that, but I will try my level best, and I'll leave it for him to maybe elaborate that a little bit. Vice President of Federation Marconi Dele Industry et al. Innovation Pharmaceutic. So my apologies, Ayman, if I got that absurdly wrong, but I'll leave it for you for correcting it. So he's an entrepreneur, and he loves philosophy and arts, and to top it all, he's got an obsession towards access to healthcare in Africa and GA. He joined Cooper Pharma in 2000 and has served as the general manager since 2003. He's a graduate from Stanford Business School after a master's degree from Schema from France. So welcome, Ayman, for the panel. Thank you very much for taking the time out. I know it's busy schedules. So moving from a very entrepreneurial journey to another very youngster here, whom I know him a little bit, I met him before, is Mr. Alak Patel. So Alak comes from a very, very, very interesting East African pharmaceutical company called Cosmos, one of the leading pharmaceutical company in East Africa. So he's the third generation family member of one of the East Africa's largest pharmaceutical companies. He's based in Nairobi, Kenya. He's currently leading business development, product development at Cosmos. By way of training, he's a biotechnologist and a biochemical engineering by training. It's a very humble introduction, but as much as I know Alak, I can tell you with guarantee that one of the sharpest youngsters I've met from a business background and who's holding the forte of Cosmos and is very, very committed to growing that business to much greater height. So again, Alak, thank you very much for joining this panel. It is going to be a very interesting session. So moving on from now, the flow of this panel going forward is, I'm going to take the opportunity to attempt rather, given my esteemed colleagues here, attempt to try and talk a little bit about how I perceive Africa as an opportunity and how Cipla perceives Africa as an opportunity, a land of opportunities rather. And I'm going to talk about some macro economics and macro elements that sort of navigate Africa. And I'm going to leave it to my two esteemed colleagues again for specifically talking about countries around East Africa and North Africa. So with that, if you allow me to share my presentation, like I said, my flow presentation is going to be in three parts. I've attempted to talk a little bit about CIPLA, which many of the audience, I presume, would know, but I'll touch briefly about our specific presence in Africa. Then moving on to how we perceive the Africa as a land of opportunity. We've got some very interesting insights and inferences that we made from multiple dimensions of how this particular continent is being working. And finally, we also want to take the opportunity to present to you how do we think as what's the right go-to-market model. Then obviously, I want to caveat this by saying, obviously, this is from a CIPLA perspective and our perspective, and I'm not harnessing the fact that this is the perfect go-to-market model, because when it comes to Africa, the one clear challenge, which I'm sure everybody will agree, is it's one continent with 30 odd different countries. So everything has to be tailor-made to some degree. So very briefly about CIPLA, many of you would have heard about CIPLA as an organization. So we are based out in headquartered in Mumbai in India. We're listed in the Mumbai Stock Exchange. We've clocked revenues about $2.54 billion, market cap of $8.4 billion, 25,000 employees. We've been debt-free in the last year, which is very good news for the shareholders. And you can see our sort of ladder position across multiple areas. We're the first in dry powder inhalers, which talks to us about the strength in respiratory and lung leadership that CIPLA holds. Moving to being the second largest pharmaceuticals company in India, the generic pharmaceuticals company in India, the third largest in South Africa, 10th largest in prescriptions, and leadership positions in Nepal and Morocco, again, speaking to the Africa. Moving on, this is a slide which I was trying to capture how our Africa is organized, Africa business is organized. So if you look at the top, what we call as SAGA. SAGA stands for South Africa and Global Access. Our vision in Africa is, we'll talk about the vision, it's to be a $1 billion organization in Africa. The way we've organized ourselves are, these are the 4 profit centers that we've organized ourselves into. South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, which includes East Africa, French West, North Africa also. And we've got the CIPLA QCIL business based in Uganda. We'll specifically talk about what that business does. And then we've got the Global Access business, primarily to promote access of healthcare in Africa. So overall, we are a 450 million rand business unit, and we're going at 2 to 3% consolidated. Now, 2 to 3% optically might look as smaller numbers, single-digit number. But if you look at from a consolidated perspective on a base of $450–500 million, I suppose this would be some very enriching numbers for many companies. Moving on. So here we have South Africa. I just want to represent South Africa a little bit before we jump into Africa, larger Africa, about CIPLA. So we are the third largest company, like I said. We are behind Aspen and Adcock, who are our close competitors. But if you look at the slide on the right for a minute, if you see the growth rates that are there, we've been seeing these impressive growth rates of 0.24% positive over the last 5 years continuously. So that's consistent performance from South Africa for CIPLA. And if you split that between the new base and the new products price and the base, you see the figures around the new products, which is very compelling because 2.8% on the new products is really driving the growth. Coming to the left side of the graphs, this is again talking to the consistent market performance over the last 5 years, except for a little bit of a blip in 2017. We've been consistently growing and much above the market. And we're still holding the leadership positions across respiratory, CNS, cardiovascular, elementary, GI as it's called sometimes, and systemic anti-infectives. So that's who we are in South Africa. Very quickly into Africa, this is a very broad view of how we look at Africa. So if you look at the slide on the graph on the left, so this is where the blue boxes where we've got a direct to market presence, and the orange yellow ones are where we have a distributor-led business and with manufacturing facilities in South Africa and Morocco and Uganda. Now, this is an evolving business model, I must say, I must qualify here, because we are constantly relooking at the way to operate in Africa. Every year almost, we keep relooking at the business model and the go-to-market model and learning from it and ensuring that we've got the right model to operate there. On the right side, it might be sounding a little presumptuous, but if I look at in comparison to many of the multinationals or the originator companies, we believe our presence in Africa, which contributes to roughly 25% of our global revenues, talks to itself in terms of our vision being very long-term in Africa. We're not looking it to be a fly-by-night operator, and therefore our emphasis on growing Africa in the next 20 years or 30 years or even beyond is very, very robust. So that's Cipla and the overview of Cipla so far. Now moving to the land of opportunity. Now I've got a few slides and a few data points to generally talk about how we see Africa, and this is what I've got here. This is from a IQVIA report, I must say, and if you look at what are the factors that are driving this and what drives this is going to come further, is very clearly, if you see the metrics on population density. One thing that I think Africa as a continent, when we look at it, is we've got to be very, very clear about where it is heading in terms of the pure demographic allocation. I see the next 2015 to 2050, if you're adding 1.3 billion people in Africa, we're almost creating another China, another India. Maybe China and India are going to be much bigger at that point in time, but we're almost creating another China and India. And that's not a market, that's not a space one would like to avoid. So that's one factor. The second factor clearly is 4.3% forecasted GDP growth. Now that's extremely positive again. And this is not just the forecasted growth. Even if you look at the last 5 years GDP growth in Africa, it's an impressive 5% and over. So that again tells me about across the emerging markets, within the pharmaceutical landscape and even beyond, the 5% growth in the last 5 years and the 4.3% that's projected going forward is something really to be compelling opportunities to be presented here. And if you look at similarly, if you then break it down into regions. Now, one thing about Africa, which I'm sure my colleagues will speak a little bit more and agree with me more often or not, is Africa is one continent, however, but we've got these 5 regions, the way it's segmented here: North and West Africa, South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and rest of Africa. It's very, very different in its own ways. There are elements of harmony, there are elements of synergies, but at the same time, each of them are very fragmented by its own measure. So if you look at, even if you break it down and look at the growth rates there at 6.5%, 6.4%, I was doing some math around the average of this and looking at about 4.3%, which on the top again, is a very, very optimistic view about Africa. And it's not really optimistic, it's also more or less a realistic view about Africa, I suppose. Now, the graph of the life. Now, why I believe that Africa is the next potential market to be, which is untapped in my view, in our Cipla's view, is if you look at the projected forecast between 2018 and 2022, I see $6 billion of opportunity here. Now, COVID or non-COVID or post-COVID, this could have been derailed by a couple of more years, for various factors, either again, like attributed to COVID or not. But even if the 2022 figures were reflective of 2025 figures of $6 billion, I still think it's an extremely value proposition here to look at that $6 billion opportunity. Even if the $6 billion comes down to $5 billion, I still think that's a very, very optimistic and realistic number to go forward. So moving on, therefore, I believe that the true potential is still existing in Africa, and we've got to look at Africa from a perspective of the real shifts that's really taking place in Africa. So to that extent, I'm questioning myself, what is driving this $6 billion of market opportunity going forward? And really, when I look at this slide, which talks about 5 or 6 key factors here, and there are multiple elements that are function to these factors. I can't tell you for one that none of these factors are already existing in Africa in its own ways and means. None of them are new, none of them are yet to begin or yet to start the journey, whether it's the healthcare expenditure, the changing disease patterns, the maturity of the business environment, really to speak about the regulatory landscape there and how vehemently it's shifting. And the shift towards generic, the incentivization that's happening towards promoting generics across the country, across the continent, sorry, and partnership, very, very unique partnerships that's never happened actually even in other developed economies like in the US or the West. And then there is digital innovation. Again, it's very easy to sit somewhere in America or in Europe and think that these are advanced nations with much digital interventions. When it comes to Africa, maybe there is not. But we'll be surprised to see the amount of digital interventions and innovations that are taking place in Africa as we speak just now. So these to me are very fundamental shifts that are happening. Like I said, these are not futuristic, these are current, these are present. We see this on the business every day, every now and then. So I want to maybe spend a little time in talking a little bit about why those factors are very reflective of what's happening in Africa and why I believe that these are real opportunities present to us. So if you look at this particular slide about urbanization, now I'm a firm believer of any economy developing is primarily pegged around urbanization. Now, urbanization talks to consumption, and consumption talks to GDP, and GDP talks to better healthcare spend. So you can make a sort of a logical framework across why such urbanization will trigger better health economies and therefore better for pharmaceutical companies. So very clearly, if you see the slide on the left, the graph there talks to us about, like I said, it's not just futuristic, but it's also been happening historically. Since 2004-15, you can see the consumption reaching 1.4 trillion in 2015, the second fastest growing in the world. And if you compare in comparison to other big economies like emerging markets, Middle East, Latin America, Central and Eastern Europe, the 3.9%, I believe, is extremely exciting again. Now, if you statistically project that forward, what you see there is, again, the $650 billion in terms of consumption growth. Now, this is on real terms. I mean, the 2015 numbers, I was very surprised to see when I was looking at the deeper analytics on this particular graph. On real-time basis, on 2015 prices, the consumption was already at 1.4 billion. That's going up to 2 billion. So there is a $650 billion consumption growth that's likely to take place by 2025. Again, give COVID the benefit, 2025 might look like 2027, 2028, but I still think it's very, very healthy and interesting and intriguing numbers there. Now, what does it all mean to us like pharmaceutical companies? What I see is my inference from here is all of this is dictating the fact that there is 100 plus African metropolitans that are likely to come with a million population and above. So that to me equates 100 million population or 100 million people as opportunity. Now 100 million people is something that one can never ignore. And 100 million people, very loosely put, is a bunch of many of the large European countries together. So that's something that I would be very, very extremely positive about. That's my key takeaway here. And more importantly, urbanization that we all know has a 2.5x higher productivity than rural. Now, I'll elaborate that a little bit in the coming forward in the slides where I talk about how we look at Africa from a segmented view of urbanization. So moving forward, the second most interesting piece to me is this, which is very relevant to us as pharmaceutical industry and is extremely critical to observe the trends here. Now, this slide here is across the IMS IQVIA data again from a value perspective in 2018. But I can tell you with all assurance that we are seeing this within our own business within Cipla in Africa. Now, there are two fundamental shifts that's happening here. So one is the shift towards generics, and most importantly, across the acute segment, and not so much in the chronic. Now, I think my belief there is, I think it's a journey and it's only a matter of time before that shift happens, even in the chronic segment. So if you look at across the acute, whether it's the systemic antibacterials, hypertensives, anti-inflammatory, allergy, cough and cold, across, except for insulins, which is again the diabetic range, mostly confined to type 1 diabetes or a little bit into type 2. I think that's again a very it's a road to catch up there. And more importantly, the shift from just before between the generics and the originator split, you can also see the trend shifting towards the nature of diseases, the disease patterns, I mean here. So the chronic, the so-called anti-malarials, antivirals that used to be the driving factor in Africa maybe 10 years before or 15 years before is not anymore the case. This is pretty much the classical world representation, in my view, of the disease patterns that change in Africa. So we're still now looking at NCDs. That's what Africa is defined about. No more CDs, no more communicable diseases. It's all about NCDs. And to that extent, Kenya, you can, in the last 12, 18 months, if I saw the data, that 23% growth in antihypertensives as opposed to antibacterial growth of 11%. Now, to me, that's a very, very intriguing data point to talk about why this captures it. So moving on. Now, these are the other patterns of change. If you see the three different loops here, the one on the left talks about the manufacturing incentivized. So what does this do? The changing disease landscape, the changing the demographies and the change and the urbanization that's happening here, where it really pegs into three very clear categories for me. Incentivizing manufacturing localization, it's very much happening. It's everybody in the panel would agree with me that the import restrictions in many places and incentivizing local manufacturing, examples like Algeria, Morocco, Kenya, Nigeria, etc. And the central bucket where is again talking to the shifting in disease patterns from CDs to NCDs, where more than 300 programs of public-private partnerships, which really of which 40% or 40 plus programs are really speaking towards the non-communicable diseases. And pretty much talking about the four key elements: accessibility, awareness, public relationship, and healthcare framework. And more importantly, like I said in the beginning, the digital footprint. I think this is very, very, to me, impressive. If you look at the number of users already in Africa, 81% in Nigeria, mobile users traffic, and about 85% in South Africa. I'm very intrigued to see how does the additional 1.3 billion people that are going to get added to this, how it's going to transform the digital footprint in Africa, and what is going to mean for ease of supply chain, better distribution, better reach to the people, therefore, and better access to healthcare and pharmaceutical products overall. So with that, having spoken about the opportunities and the way the landscape is, I just want to spend a couple of more minutes on how we think is the right go-to-market model. Now, again, this is a slide which again catches my attention more often than not, is when you look at urbanization in Africa, one of the key things that we've realized is to really segment it. Now, the segmenting talks about how does urbanization mean from a global perspective, and how does urbanization mean in an Africa context? Now, urbanization in Africa context is really the upper middle class, the middle class, working class. And if you see the sort of the funnel approach there, you really know which part of the funnel do you really want, or the pyramid do you want to really focus on. So that's where I think is a very interesting trend that's happening. And this actually talks to the company strategy, defining on how they define success for themselves as to how you want to tap the upper and middle class, and also have access portfolio of some degree to the rural class. And again, split of the portfolio, whether it's the chronic portfolio, the acute portfolio. And this is, again, pretty much talking to the same thing, and more specifically to within each large economy or the market. I think there is a fundamental belief that one should look at the key cities there, whether it's Lagos, Nairobi, Accra, and a few other cities across the big nation. I think that's one way how you can really focus your attention, your efforts, and your resources across Africa and ensure that you've got the right success model out of there. And lastly, this is again just a very a very quick look as to what are we see as the potential countries, potential markets. And if you look at the bottom numbers there, I think this really talks about how one can drive the real portfolio strategy across the key 23, 25 markets here, and you still can be a very sizable, attractive value proposition in Africa. So overall, that would be my slide. But overall, therefore, my sentiment is Africa is a land of opportunity. I want to reiterate that. And I've got a lot of confidence, a lot of optimism to that degree, and not really driven by just market sentiment, but by purely driven by data and analytics. So with that, I want to leave the session open and invite my other colleagues maybe to add more color to specific regions of the continent that they come from, Mr. Ayman and also Mr. Alak. I would love to now see if I can get Alak Patel and talk a little bit about East Africa and the specifics and the opportunity and the challenges that you see in East Africa. Thank you, Alak.
Good, thank you, Kamal. Thank you for your presentation. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good morning to some people. I'm not really sure where everyone is based, but I think it's very important what you said about Africa. People tend to sort of group Africa as one place, but from my experience here, I think each country has its own unique challenges, and it's very, very different to each other. So I want to talk about sort of East Africa in particular. And before I do that, I just want to talk about Cosmos as a company, because probably unlike the other speakers, which are sort of multinational based organizations, Cosmos is a relatively small company, small globally, big, I would say, in East Africa. And so not many people would know too much about it. So just to introduce, the Cosmos is a relatively old company. It was established in 1976. But only really started going into manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in 1984. We have over 300 registered products, and we're in about...
I have no access to any comments.
Hello? Okay. So we have about we're in about 12 different sub-Saharan countries, and employ about 500 plus people. So I think one of the key milestones of Cosmos was it was one of only 2 African companies that was given the license to make HIV drugs, antiretrovirals. So it was ourselves here in Kenya and Aspen in South Africa. So this was around 2004, and I think that was quite a big milestone in the company. So in terms of Cosmos's strategy, Cosmos started as mainly sort of a company supplying tender business, because most of the sort of pharmaceutical consumption in Kenya was through the government. So I would say about 80% or 70% of sales were to the government when the company first started, and now they probably contribute to about 20%. So the company strategy has moved away from sort of the generic market as we think of it to a more branded generic company, concentrating, as Kamal says, in NCDs, which is one of the fastest growing areas in Africa. And the way we've been able to do this is spending a lot on product development and really coming out with new therapeutic treatments which are very affordable. So one of the key areas is to always be the first to market generic in NCDs. So I was part of the team when I joined the company that developed rivaroxaban, vildagliptin, and now dapagliflozin for the Kenya market. And then another part of the strategy of the company is to really look for partnerships in areas where we cannot sort of manufacture those products. So currently we have some partnerships going on. One being with Biocides from Argentina, which is a biotechnology company. I think some of you may have heard of it. It, and then in the future we would look at sort of fill and finish of these products. Another partner we sort of deal with is Intas for the injectables, and more specifically for veterinary injectables, as well as Pantherex, which is a sort of a US startup company which has sort of developed probiotics, which we brand in our name and then bring here. So this is really to leverage of Cosmos's brand equity in this sort of market. Another strategy of the company is to sort of focus on exports now. It was sort of always the philosophy to be the best in your home market first before sort of branching out too much. So although I say that we're in 12 different countries, some of the countries we're doing very little business, or we haven't really sort of invested a lot in those countries, but going into the future, it's something that we definitely plan to do. So these are the countries that currently we're working in. So you can see we've sort of segmented them into awaiting registration approvals. Registrations which have already been approved, but we're not actively selling there, but we have product registered there. We have our active markets where we actively sell products, and then we are waiting on some countries to register the products. So a strong point of Cosmos is I think the reach of the company in terms of a distribution network, and I think this is just purely being here for so many years, time to have quite an efficient distribution network. In terms of manufacturing, we have one plant which is located in Nairobi. So we do sort of 7 different dosage forms here: tablets, capsules, dry powder suspensions, liquids such as creams, and externals. This plant is one of only 2 in Kenya that has, I would say, an international regulatory approval. So in our case, it's the PICS and the USAID approval. And this was sort of fundamental to as a company, company's strategy in the past, because the main cornerstone is built on quality. I think when you come to this part of the world, quality is not sort of the standardized practice over here. You get companies which vary a lot in quality, and that's all down due to the regulatory bodies not being so strong. But I think over time we're seeing more and more the regulation becoming stronger in these sort of areas. Right now we're sort of operating at really quite a high capacity. We operate at 24 hours operation. And I think the last couple of years we've been really kind of struggling with capacity constraints. So it's something that we're now investing in to increase capacities. So in terms of a local manufacturing overview, this is some old data from 2014, but sort of gives you an idea about relative market sizes. But I think more importantly is the number of local manufacturers. So you can see, pretty much apart from Kenya, there's very, very little presence of local manufacturing in the other countries. And I put this down to really very few protectionist policies in place. So I was looking at the other slides and I was seeing, in North Africa, what they do, in Southeast Asia, what they do. But in Kenya, in Kenya, there's very little sort of protectionist policy. The only sort of policy there is there's a 5% distribution differential price preference for government tenders. So it's 15% for manufacturers, but 10% for an importer. So I mean, the difference is only 5%, which is not going to attract many companies to sort of put up a plant and run it here. Uganda is probably the next country that has a preference, which is a 12% verification fee, which is for some products which can be made locally and there's sufficient capacity. So these are for really generic items like paracetamol, ciprofloxacin, but that's about it. I think for the other countries, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, there's not really any policies in place. So this makes it very difficult, obviously, for anybody who wants to sort of put a manufacturing plant in place. So I think also going forward, it's the people who are already established here, who have manufacturing presence here, are the ones which will take advantage of that. But I don't see sort of much new investment going into that area. So this is a very interesting slide because it basically shows from my point of view, being a manufacturer in Kenya, what are the competitive advantages and disadvantages of, our competitors. So I can split, competitors into three different categories, being the local manufacturers, generic importers, and multinational companies. Multinational companies, innovator companies, when I refer to that. So obviously the biggest disadvantage of a local company right now is there's very little brand perception. So a lot of our competitors are, selling products based on pricing, which is not sustainable in the long run because we see a lot of price erosion, where sort of different competitors are just undercutting each other to keep their manufacturing facilities operational. But it's just a matter of time till people realize that this is not really sustainable. So I think where we've been successful is we've been able to build brands, and if you see our products in the market, you will never really see them being the cheapest products. But the brands have been built because of the quality. And what the other competitor local manufacturers are facing is that because of the low margins, it's very difficult to invest money, in facilities and in brand building to capture this. There's also very little capacity to develop products from the other local companies, and then lastly, access to financing. So that's where you see a lot of IFC and sort of donors coming in and offering financing to sort of build up local manufacturing capacity. So the advantages to this is obviously the low overheads, and then benefit from the local manufacturing policies, which previously I'd mentioned they're there, but I mean they're not substantial. And I would say probably the biggest advantage is the faster registration process, which usually would take for a local company takes between 6 months and 1 year. Whereas I know some foreign companies which are waiting 2-3 years for registration in Kenya. So in terms of the generic importers, so I think this market used to be dominated a lot by generic importers and multinationals. But I think what is generally happening is there's a lot of quality issues associated with generic importers now. So in a lot of the markets, you tend to see that sometimes the Kenya product is perceived of higher quality than the India or Chinese product. And this is because, there was a sort of manufacturing standards where they would sort of, if it was coming to the Africa market, these products would not be, manufactured in the same facilities that, would be sending products to Europe or other places. They're also facing a lot of increased regulation in their home markets to improve the quality standards. So this is obviously increasing the costs of that, longer registration times, and susceptible now to currency changes. I mean, Kenya as such has been relatively stable in terms of currencies, and we'll touch on that. But the other African countries have been sort of, up and down a bit. And that sort of has a big impact when it comes to, price sensitive generic drugs. So the advantages of this is obviously the aggressive marketing tactics. These are companies which have been, in the pharmaceutical business for a while. So they have the know-how, they're more aggressive in marketing. They have long established brands. These are also brands which have been here for 20 years. And lastly, the no patents. So we've seen, like in the past, where India could supply products without patents. I think that's closing up now. But there are definitely advantages of products coming from Bangladesh and Pakistan, which don't have the patents, and so that gives them a bit of an advantage here. And then lastly, in terms of the multinationals, who've really dominated the market here for a long time, especially in terms of value. Maybe not so much in terms of volume of products, actual consumption, but in terms of value, the products are obviously priced much higher. But I'm seeing sort of disadvantages going forward is in terms of the long decision-making processes, restricted marketing activities, pricing pressure from healthcare providers. So in the case of Kenya, there's the government supplying medicines to the lower class. The middle class are, largely spending out of pocket, and the upper class are basically on private insurers. And these private insurers are the ones who are sort of reimbursing for the innovator products. But over the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of private insurance companies posting, negative profits because on the healthcare segments because of the high prices of medicines that they're reimbursing. So they're also sort of putting pressure on a lot of healthcare providers and pharmaceutical companies, especially innovators, to reduce pricing. Another disadvantage is obviously local manufacturing presence, which will sort of be more of a disadvantage going forward as people buy more sort of locally produced products. And then the same sort of susceptible to currency changes. The advantages of these companies is obviously the first mover advantage, being first to market with a new innovative product, the financial resources, and the trusted images, which in Africa is very important because especially in East Africa, it's we don't assume that all pharmaceutical companies are of the same quality. So according to these are some slides taken with IMS data, and it sort of shows you the demographics of East Africa in terms of market sizes and everything. So I won't go too much into detail. I won't go too much into detail with the specific data and all of that. But you can see that these are countries which are growing in terms of GDP. They still have very sort of unfavorable business index rankings, Kenya being the best out of the other African countries, but this is going to change over time. And obviously the population demographic is very different to sort of other places in the world, especially Europe and Asia and everything like that. So there's only 3% of the population which is greater than 65. So you can see, the potential going forward into the future, what NCDs really have in this part of the world. So the challenges for East Africa are sort of, on a macro level where sort of healthcare expenditure is still very, very, very low in comparison to the rest of the world. Access to doctors, access to hospitals are still very, very, low. And I think this shows the future opportunity, not only in pharmaceuticals, but also in the digital space where, you can help access to medicines going forward. So this is just a snapshot of sort of, the Kenya market, where Cosmos is basically ranked third in the Kenya market, which is the most developed market out of the other East African countries and the largest one. So this is Cosmos without sort of government sales. So I think if you sort of put in the government business, we'd be in the second biggest company in this part of the world. So we've been experiencing a lot of, I would say, exponential growth in the last couple of years, with last year, posting 39% growth. And I think this year we'll probably post higher numbers than that. And this is purely because of, adapting to the market, which I would say is very, very important in this part of the world. Every single market is very different. I think our adapting to the market in Kenya in terms of, what the Kenya market needs and what they're looking for is very, paramount to our growth. So one of those things is as Kamal mentioned, is people are looking for, affordable treatments. Previously for the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years, people would turn to, innovator products because they could trust the quality, that these are products that work. And it was purely because you had a lot of other products which were not of very high quality, and so people would pay that premium. Now what it is if you concentrate on quality and you have good quality products that work, people are now, healthcare providers are starting to get pricing pressure that patients can't afford taking NCD products for, which are lifelong treatments, which are $30-40 a month, when in other countries these these products are sort of, $5, $6, $7 a month. And so I think that's something to really focus on is that balance between affordability and quality. So just to touch on the Kenya market specifically, as I mentioned, you can see that inflation is relatively stable. Local currency is very stable. I think 2020 was the biggest jump we ever had, and that went to about 100. That was about a 10% change in the currency, which is relatively not that big compared to other sort of surrounding countries. But Kenya is the most advanced out of all the East African countries in terms of pharmaceuticals. This is because of the purchasing power is higher, as well as people are more quality conscious, and the pharmaceutical market is more prescription driven as opposed to generic pricing driven. So people go to a doctor, and the doctor will prescribe a treatment, and everyone will get whatever the doctor prescribed. It's not a case of going to the pharmacy and the pharmacy sort of substituting treatments, which is what tends to happen in a lot of the other countries. So as I mentioned, Kenya is sort of going into a universal healthcare sort of program. It's been very slow adopting this program in the last couple of years, especially because of COVID last year. I mean, my personal opinion is that they're going to face a lot of challenges trying to manage this program. When the government doesn't have products, it's sort of turned to the private sector to sort of fill that gap.
Alok, Kamal here. So sorry to be the intruder here. My apologies, but I think it was a very compelling presentation again. Very interesting facts around Kenya, the opportunities there. But if you would allow me, I would love to then also hear Mr. Ayman from his perspective, who's pretty much leading North Africa. So that the audience can get the benefit of the whole Africa continent. My apologies to cut the presentation short. It's very intriguing, but at the same time, I think it was important to get the other side of the view as well. So my apologies.
No problem. I mean, the slides are available. I touched on the more important things. The rest are sort of the current country profiles. So no
appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, Alok. Again, thank you very much. Mr. Ayman, over to you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on Africa and your views, your insights and inferences on how Cooper Pharma specifically looks at Africa as an opportunity.
But before presenting the slides, I want to thank you for this invitation, and I'd like to share a few words of context. So basically, my presentation will be on data, but not only on data. My region, Africa, Middle East, is much more than data or cold facts, and everyone should take into account the context before jumping on any topic like access to healthcare or pharmaceuticals. And it's the same paradigm for my company, Cooper Pharma, that's been created more than 87 years ago. So I'll give in this speech a perspective that is not only from a manager, but also owner of a company. And sometimes it could be different bones of contention when you have this position, this two position. So I'm trying to do it to the best of my abilities. So 5 words before starting the presentation. The first one is autonomization. The second one is useful tools for these pharmaceutical companies or distribution branch. The third one would be about no complex towards the West. The fourth one will be that we can be into pharmaceutical or healthcare business and in the same time doing sense, doing meaning, trying at least to do that. And the fifth one will be about market creation, knowing that the figures you'll see on Gvia or IMS are not reality. Can you hear me? Can you still hear me? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you fine.
Okay, that's fine. So, in terms of autonomization, we must all take into account the history and the colonial past of all of us. And our challenge is to, I don't know why there's this echo. Can you hear the echo or not? So I think it's better now. It's okay. So autonomy, just give me some feedback because I'm left alone here, not knowing if you are
It
with me.
works fine. We can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay. Localization, as my friend said, is very important. And the name of the game here for us is autonomization. In an interdependence world where we need to work with any party coming from big pharma, but still develop our own African or Middle Eastern capabilities. We can do both, but we need to develop more our things. The second point is that we are much more than business or any industry. We are something that is necessary, and it's high time that we speed up on that to have access to healthcare. So our objectives are higher than a personal or business-oriented objective. The third one is that there's no complex to have towards the West. In my group, we have 9 pharmaceutical plants. 3 are EMA approved and 2 are on the process to be US FDA approved, with no intention to do business in Europe or US, but just to signal the quality. So even in our regions of the world, we can be at par in quality with the best quality, safety, medicine solutions that guys that in more advanced countries are lucky to have. We can still have them there. And this is reality. And if we have managed to do that in Morocco or in other parts of Africa and Middle East, every country should start on the road to do that. The sense is the fourth point. I mean, the meaning. We can do business and also create sense of helping each other to have our population to have access to healthcare. And I'm no politician, I'm no philosopher. I'm really well grounded in my day-to-day operation of pharmaceuticals. And I can tell you that in our main plant at Cooper Pharma, our average ex-factory price is $2 US, and we still make profit in a very decent way, not as high as the others, but so making also sound business with accessible pricing at quality is possible. Nobody should tell you something else. The last point is about this market creation. All our job is market creation. So the data we are seeing in terms of IMS or ECVIA are just data that are generated by originators mainly and mostly in the history and still here, of course, and they are most welcome, and local people who just have started to design the market, but the market is much more, and I can develop that. These are the 5 points I wanted to share before jumping on the conventional presentation that we can start now. So we can go to the next or the first slide, Christina, if you agree. Yeah, so basically we'll see the African pharmaceutical market while zooming on 2 markets. Then we'll see some data about Cooper Pharma, and at last, the third party will be about Middle East. Cooper being in the middle because we defined ourselves as a gateway, as a go-between. So we can start on the first part with African pharma markets. To the next slide. Thank you. So now the thing is that I'm on my iPhone because of problems, but I'll try to decipher what's there. So The main Middle East Africa markets have reached $27 billion in 2019, which is not bad. And they are growing on average by 9%, which is not bad. So it's definitely a region of the world that should be taken into consideration by small and medium pharma, by big pharma, by any players who wants to get development and access to new territories that could seem far away for them or complex, but still there are room for growth for international companies, whether their side be. In this region, Africa, Middle East, Saudi Arabia is the first market, reaching almost $10 billion, which is much more than any African market, whether it be South Africa or Egypt or another. If you can see here on the screen, let me just try to open it that way. What we have here is that, yeah, okay, now I can do it. Now I have a backup. So yeah, this is nice. So we are in a branded generic model, okay? The private market is really the driver. The growth is steady and is driven by Saudi and Egypt. They are big locomotives. Local players are contributing very much to the growth, while there's a strong competition, especially on generics. And the multinationals are starting to lag behind in terms of growth, but their market share is still significant. Among the 10 players, the top 10 players of the region are capturing almost half of the market value, led by Sanofi, Novartis, Pfizer. Then there is, of course, that's been already said, we're shifting from chronic to communicable diseases, with the profile of infections therapies or diseases that are more similar than what we can find in Europe or US and Japan. Onco is growing, diabetes, of course, cardiac, respi. I would not comment on the left slide. I think it's a no-brainer and you can have access to the presentation. Then we can go to the next slide, if you agree. Yeah, the next one. Yeah, so here we can see that if we focus only on Africa, we were almost $30 billion Africa plus Middle East. If we see Africa, we have 20 billion market, and in this Africa you would find, let's say, sub-regions, even though the fact of dividing or cutting, because our mind needs to simplify reality to kind of grasp it, is limited, but is giving us some insights. So North Africa and South Africa are, let's say, a little bit more mature market with local players who are leading the show now, competing versus big pharma. Even though IP rules are there, very strong coverage of national needs. Then we can go to some emerging countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia. Our friend of Cosmos told us about them. All the countries are West and East Africa, so the Francophone West ones, to exclude Nigeria and Ghana, just the West Francophone. And then East Africa, let's say the East Africa Council, very fragmented and depend way much on imports. So basically, we are in a continent that still imports 80 to 90% of its local needs. That's not normal. If we see on the right, the main challenges, of course, first challenge is logistics, as in any industry doing business in Africa. And you can find some nice report from McKinsey since 2010 on how to address that, how to do business with the top 10 cities, to circumvent a little bit these challenges, etc. But basically, we're in a situation where supply chain is complicated, but still countries are finding solutions. That is where creativity kicks in, where we are in dire need. We are establishing the first pharma company in Rwanda, for instance, and you know, in Rwanda it's called Le Pays aux Mille Collines, 1,000 small amounts, and they have found a solution, as you might have known for sure, of sending drones delivering HIV product treatments or vaccines to remote areas. So when you are in need, you find solution that are local, adapted to your local needs. So it's very limited for us to see with the glances of another country, even within Africa. I mean, every country has its specificities, and we should attain for that. This is not something that a multinational can handle, or a big company like Indian companies we know, who are very much my friends, like the Cipla, very, very much. But still, the more you are big, the more you're driven by something else. You're driven by your shareholders, by the stock exchange, by the banks, etc. And then they say, okay, we have arbitrage to do. So local solutions by local people. I'm not talking Moroccan or Cuban to find some local, but everyone should try to help its own country. And that's also the message of King of Morocco, Mohammed VI. And it's high time to do that, or at least to try to do that. And I am deeply convinced that it's possible. Then we have a patchy distribution system with markups of these distributors, etc. You know, logistic costs can be very high, margin are quite high, etc. If you take West Africa, how come that in 2021, West Africa still depends on two distributors who are not even located in Africa, but in France? They are capturing 70 to 80% market share of distribution from France. I mean, I'm French educated. I'm very close to French. I have a lot of business with French, but come on, why can't we find a proper solution that can complement this? We're not in a position to say we're going to change the game. No, we just make it evolve, and needs to be local solutions that add to the picture of existing solutions, existing system. Regulation, of course. Then takeaway here for any pharma company, food supplement company, company in healthcare, products or services. Key takeaway, you need to do a very good due diligence on selecting the right logistics, distribution, or manufacturing partner to you when you go into Africa or even Middle East. That is slightly different, but same story. And you need to select, I think, compliant partners, not the ones that will get you DMA quickly, a good price or whatever, quick business. This is not at all what takes us on the long run. You need to check guys who are CGMP when it comes to manufacturing. You need to check guys who are into ethics. You need to check guys who have a sound financial situation. And you have some surprises when you go into Africa or East Africa. I had surprises. People big, large in distribution, but actually financial problems. You don't want this, except if you're a manager who's running the show for a short term that is incentivized by the bonus he'll get at the end of the year. And that's the flow of the system also of some big or medium pharma companies. Compliancy in terms also of healthcare, etc. So that's my advice. Then despite these challenges, of course, as Kamal said, as many of our friends said, potential is there. Potential is there because to talk business now, we have more and more better expansion of healthcare coverage. Today, on average, I think we are 58% out of pocket money for a healthcare expenditure. This is changing a little bit. Governments are understanding more and more, and now they can a little bit more, because if they it's a complicated task also to manage a budget, a nation's budget. So they are investing more in healthcare. That's the case of Morocco, that has done that from decades very well. Biosimilar also is something that is now starting to happen. The importance of the patient centricity, we can find it this and there. Increasing investment by public and private initiatives, and promotion of local manufacturing or localization. And of course, as I think Kamal said or someone said, the population of 1 billion today will turn within the next 30 years in 2050 to double to 2. That is a big challenge, but I'll take it very positively and say, yes, we can do it. Everything will be fine. We need to work not only on the pharma, but on different fronts. Urbanization, middle class race, this all have been said previously. If we zoom on Morocco, then we'll zoom on, I think, West Africa, quickly on East Africa, and then in Saudi, and then a few words on Cooper, and we'll be done. So if we zoom on Morocco, that is the next slide, actually. Christina. So just Cooper Pharma in a nutshell. It's last year almost $300 million USD, and this incoming year we should be at 400 because of an acquisition that was stopped by a process in COVID, but now that is green light. 9 manufacturing plants, 9 distribution centers, and presence in North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, and GCC, with Saudi and UAE being the biggest thing. We have a dual business model of branded generics, multinationals like Pfizer, Merck, Takeda, Glaxo, etc., but also branded generics who are going very big. We're going into biosimilars and vaccines very solidly, but not talking much about them. And then what you need to get from us, we try to, not public, fully private owned, funded. We don't fund things that we cannot do on our own, so no leverage, very conservative in that sense. It's a company of people. We try to make everything with people, so that's very, very important. And we would be happy to be a gateway for you guys to come into this region, either some countries or the whole. That's the business model we have now. To talk on Morocco, very nice country, very good food and very good people. As you know, market is actually more $1.8 billion when you include clinics and hospital tenders, and it's doing quite fine. 2/3 of our local need locally manufactured, and this came from a long time vision of the royal monarchy in the 60s. And you have multinationals plant, but also locals who are driving the growth, some innovative, nice guys. And then if I'll go to Saudi Arabia, that's the biggest share, but it's very complicated because it's another environment. But really, that's the one that is driving now all our attention and focus with doing some acquisition deals of products and also manufacturing plant. So here again, you need to really choose the good partner. So happy to answer a question, happy to play in that role of long-term partners, taking pharma companies, small, medium, big pharma, whatever, good intended and in ethics into Africa, Middle East. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, Mr. Ayman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I felt like I was feeling very embarrassed to cut off a little bit of your presentation and also Alex's presentation. So I will personally apologize, but I just thought for the benefit of the audience, it might be more important to understand a couple of questions here. More than questions, if you don't mind, Alec and Ayman. So I've got a very interesting clue from what you just mentioned, Ayman, is one of the key both opportunities and challenges we as Cipla see in Africa is channel. Most often channel is seen as only for a product flow perspective and not necessarily seen as how that could be a game changer in terms of growth. It's often seen as it's okay, you just have a distributor, a wholesaler, a retailer, and that's it, the job is done. I think it's beyond that in Africa, in my personal capacity and my personal sense. I feel there's so much of value that's actually, for example, in East Africa, Alec, you would agree with me, a lot of it is sitting in that channel, not being unlocked really well. So how do companies like yourself and Cosmos yourself, how do you see that? Do you see channel as an area of opportunity, or do you see that as a pain?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question, because actually I wanted to touch on that. Is I think our success in Kenya is exactly that, unlocking the channel, whereas we have not been able to do that too much in Uganda and Tanzania. And I 100% agree that a lot of the value is held in these channels. The hardest question is, how do you do it? And I can speak from my experience in Kenya. I mean, what we did was we sort of opened up everything on a level playing field for everyone in Kenya, where basically all distributors got a harmonized pricing, and then it was up to them and their service to sort of drive the business. And that created a lot of trust between customers. And then that effectively drove the business because they could trust that there wouldn't be somebody else in the market undercutting them on prices. Now it's very different in the case of sort of Uganda, where you have to have, you're working with a sole agent, and basically you're sort of at the mercy of the sole agent. And this sole agent also deals with 10 other companies, and so it's so there are people in the market who want your product, but the route to the market is not there, and you can't control it. So that's the biggest thing that what we face. And obviously, for any foreign company going into an African country, the biggest question is, do you want to invest a lot there with a lot of uncertainty? So obviously, we can sort of solve this problem by going in ourselves and having our own distribution, having our own operations there in Uganda. But the big question is, it's a big risk. And I think you're 100% right. Unlocking the channel is the first step.
Maybe, Mr. Ayman, of course, I've got hundreds of questions if you allow me to ask all of us, but I'm going to limit it to this question. But I think it will be interesting to just get your thoughts from a North Africa perspective, because like you rightly said, I think the North Africa, Algeria, Morocco, like South Africa, a little bit more mature in comparison to East Africa and maybe even to the French West. So how do you see that channel value unlocking in your North Africa region from your perspective?
You mean in the not North Africa, not South Africa? Yeah. Correct. Very good. So we are opening in Ivory Coast Cooper Pharma plants this year, and in Rwanda also this year, and doing something else on brownfield. And everybody was discouraging us, saying, "Are you sure? Are you crazy?" etc., etc. It is long, it is tough, but it is really worth it. So I don't buy the fact that, but we are entrepreneurs, that's part of it. But I don't buy the fact that we need to maintain the statu quo. Everyone, every country, every private sector of this country need to try to do that. So I believe in it. I think we can unlock things in terms of manufacturing that way. Then the previous question is very, very important, because indeed before manufacturing, distribution access is the key thing. And here I think things are changing. I know a little bit because we, in 1933, Cooper Pharma in Morocco, we started with distribution. So this is a brand that we still have, and in Morocco only, but we might leverage it. And it was not in my strategy to go also into Africa to kind of participate in the change. And you can see also some Chinese, like a group like Fosun, who's now made an acquisition in France to go into distribution. You have another group with PEs coming there. So I think that the landscape in West Africa and also in East Africa will change. Of course, there is a big inertia because of sunk interest. So I think things are going to, we need to talk between each other. We need to talk between distributors in Kenya, distributors in Nigeria, manufacturers in Nigeria, in Morocco, in Algeria, wherever, in Ethiopia also, just to exchange information, and because there's a great asymmetry of information. The information, we have them through our long time and very nice partners that are big pharma multinationals, but we need to find spaces where we do all together. I mean, local multinational, there is definitely this. Even the development banks are not playing enough their role, I think. Not enough. Yeah.
I think you bring in a very, very interesting dimension to that. You're quite right. I think we know the CFTA does exist in Africa, but one can say how effective it is or not. But you're quite right. I think it's about time everybody comes together and talk to each other, and not necessarily work in silos, if I may say that. Okay. Very much agree. Looking forward to that. All right. I think that is so, Mr. Ayman, Alok, and Anshu. Once again, it's been a pleasure for me personally knowing you. So thank you again very much. Thank you for your time. I know it's difficult to get this time during the day. And to the audience, I just hope these presentations are very, to some it might be very deep, for some it might be very high level, but I think that's the balance that we're all looking for. Our presentations are available on the platform, so you're welcome to access and reach out to us if there are any more questions. I just hope you enjoy the session and the dialogue between all of us. Once again.